Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 8 of the Greg and Arsh podcast.
Today we have Michelle Schafer, an award-winning career coach specializing in leadership, career transition, and team coaching.
Thank you for joining us, Michelle. We're so happy to have you.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me. This is my very first podcast, so I'm excited to be here.
Amazing.
That's awesome.
Awesome. All right. So tell us a little bit about where you grew up and how was life there?
Sure. So I grew up in Markham, Ontario, predominantly, and my parents are still there. So I'm right now in Ottawa, and I've been in Ottawa for, the last 16 years.
Oh, wow.
I still visit Markham quite a lot, especially because my parents are there. I remember when I was going to high school in Markham, I attended Markham District High School, which had 2,500 kids.
Wow.
Oh,
And
wow.
it was huge for a high school.
Mhm.
And when I went to university, I went to Wilfrid Laurier University. And at that time, Laurier was maybe just double my high school. So
Wow.
Wow.
usually people go to university and it's like massive space and there's so many kids. And no, not as much for me because of just the population there. So
That's crazy.
So yeah, lots going on in Markham. It's grown exponentially since then. Now it's the city of Markham. It used to be the town of Markham.
Yeah.
And I was a bowler when I was growing up. I never participated in any athletic sports, which is so funny because I'm quite opposite now. But I was a bowler in Markham. So that was kind of my big sport. And I think I was in 3 bands in high school, like when I was growing up. So
Wow.
loved music and played the flute. And so really enjoyed that experience. Seems like ages ago now.
Cool. Well, that's fantastic.
You could play the flute. Yeah, most people like me, I think, would blow into a flute and nothing would come out other than spittle.
Yep.
And probably if I had to pick up my flute now, I still have it actually. If I own my flute then, that would probably happen, Greg. So
Yeah.
That's so funny.
Okay, so tell us about your educational background. I guess you referenced it slightly with the Laurier thing, but go into that a little bit more.
yeah, so I loved my experience at Wilfrid Laurier. So I mean, that's one thing I suppose we have in common, in that you went to U of W, which
Yeah.
was right down the road. I remember at the time I attended Wilfrid Laurier, it was before it went through its big expansion, what it's known as now.
Yeah.
And it used to be just called the high school down the street by University of Waterloo. I remember that vividly
Oh, my.
because it was so much smaller than
Yeah.
U of W. It's changed a lot now, obviously. And it's interesting, like the coaching work that I do is about, predominantly, career transition and moving, to different places. And I think of my education background being the same, because I actually wanted to get into the business program at Laurier and the other schools I applied for. And I am not great at math. I know you both would excel in that subject.
I don't know about that.
Supposed to excel.
But I didn't, and that stood in my way actually in that last year, where the marks count so much. So I didn't get into the business programs that I wanted to get into. But Wilfrid Laurier had an option where I could do a BA and I could minor in business. It was called the administration option. And so I was able to really combine my love of English. So I majored in English and
Wow.
did a minor in business. So it was a full course load. I didn't, really have those spares in my schedule that some of my friends
Yeah.
had doing 2 subjects like that. But I honestly look at the 4 years that I spent at Laurier being probably some of the best years of my life, really, because I made friendships and built relationships that I still have now. There's
Wow.
a course class from our English language and literature program, which was only one graduating class.
Oh.
Not a lot of people, had that major. And so there's a number of us that are still friends. We get together once a year. This year, I'm going to date myself, but this year was my 30-year grad anniversary, should say in 2022. So a group of us, we got together and we were able to spend the weekend together. And even now I still give back to Wilfrid Laurier. Like I do some networking workshops with them on occasion, and still support them financially too, like as an alum. So, it's just all signs that, that experience was really positive for me.
That's amazing. Wow. I'm so happy to hear that.
Yeah, that's so great to hear.
That's so nice.
I hope that my boys will have great experiences when it's their turn. I mean, I've got 2 boys. They're age 14 and 16. And my 16-year-old next year will, need to decide where he wants to go and where he wants to focus his attention. And, I'm sure having those discussions with him will take me right back to where I was, trying to figure all that out for myself years and years ago. But, it's so important to be able to spend that time with an institution that, like that you believe in, that, stands for the same things that you do, that you can not only get a great education, but also really build some long lasting relationships and friendships. And when I think of the friends that I'm still in touch with, I mean, it's amazing that those friendships have been like 30 years since we graduated, plus the 4 that we were together. Like that's almost 5 years of staying friends, and it was all because of university.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, I hope to, so I totally agree with you. My experience at Waterloo was also the same. I mean, I graduated recently, but I, of course, loved my years there, and I miss Waterloo, actually. So, yeah, happy to hear that.
What do you miss the most?
The carefree lifestyle. I feel like now that I'm graduated, I have a lot more responsibilities, well, quote unquote responsibilities, but still, that portion.
You got to pay taxes and stuff.
I have to pay taxes and stuff, and so.
Yeah. All the adulting when, these things that you've got to look after. So
yeah.
Big things to focus attention on post-graduation.
Yep, absolutely. All right.
Wait, actually, I had a question I wanted to slip in based off that conversation was, so comparing university to, I guess you said 34 years ago you started.
That's cool. That's amazing.
Yeah. So do you think students will be more or less or equally social than they were then versus now? Because now everybody, like universities, they have so many like digital groups. They're always messaging and emailing, but maybe at the same time people are less social because they'll spend more time in the room. So what do you think?
That's a great question. And I think, the pandemic of the last 3 years has influenced things greatly in that area. Some of the things I remember, like being on campus, was, dropping in and being able to talk to people in their rooms and having a roommate too, which, even that alone has changed. There's so many accommodations now. And I think part of this is pandemic influence where there's single rooms. So, more often now, I think, students can go to the room, close the door, and kind of just, be in a silo, like just on their own, with the exception of the common areas like, kitchens and TV rooms and whatnot. And online learning throughout the last few years has really put people more into that silo. Like now you missed out on the social aspects of just simply being at school when everything is just connected to the computer. So I don't know. I think that there's going to be some social differences. I even look at my own boys, they have very healthy friendships and they definitely go out and do things with them. But there's also a fair amount of online time, like even just playing video games. It's social, but it's on your own, so those opportunities have really shifted like how we relate to each other. And I think there are going to be, some individuals, especially as they graduate and they start to navigate the working world, although so many opportunities are virtual now, just that ability to have a conversation, like kind of like this, right? For like an hour in an interview might be hard for some people because they just haven't needed to do that, through their education, or maybe even through like their friendships. So I think it's still early days. What we're seeing is the impact, but I think we'll be seeing maybe more of that, like as the years go on. It'd be interesting to look out for it for sure.
Yeah. Wow. That's a great answer.
Yeah, totally. One of the things, again, just popped up into my head is like, I think there is something magical about being able to see the person that you're talking to. And I think that video calls do that relatively well. Like I think I'd feel pretty similar if you were in the same room versus the video call. Like it doesn't feel too different to me. One of the weirdest things I think is like, and we'll probably talk about it later, but if you were to do like an interview or if you're already in a company, like a call with your manager, you don't even know if it's going to be like a video call or not sometimes. Like it'll be like a call and you're like, oh, should I like block my camera? Is this going to be audio? And you figure it out like at the first few seconds of the call what it actually is. So so weird.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, that's an important point too, just to highlight. It's always important to be prepared. Like assume that you are going to be on camera.
Yeah.
You know, and this does become the challenge, you know, with interviewing, that a lot of interviews are still virtual. And so interviews are largely about making a connection too with the interviewer or the panel, like if you're so lucky to be interviewed by multiple people at the same time, and to be able to convey that enthusiasm and that energy for wanting the job. Now, can you do that effectively over video? Yeah. It's also not for everybody. Even something as simple as making eye contact. Like right now, I'm making direct eye contact with you and your viewers when they have a chance to review this. But if I were to just look at your faces, which is actually what I'm doing right now, well, what they see is me like looking down.
Yep.
Now I'm making eye contact, and people forget even just that subtle difference that in an interview or really any conversation when you're online, you do need to look into that little green light at the top of your device, because otherwise you're missing the opportunity to make that connection, to actually have that eye contact. So, you know, the virtual world has its pluses. You know, one of the things certainly I hear from my own clients who want to work virtually, that you really have no interest in being in an office, is they love the flexibility. They love to be able to manage their own time. They like, you know, like being able to be at home and, you know, put a load in the laundry, for example, while they're working, not having to commute, those kind of things. And I also hear the flip, where there are some people that just really are done with online worlds, and they just are craving that connection and that belonging that can be created virtually. But not all leaders are skilled. I mean, this is kind of the leadership development side of what I work with. There are some leaders that just are not skilled at building that. And people leave leaders. They oftentimes don't leave like their job necessarily. And leaders who are, you know, not building that connection, where people feel like they're kind of off somewhere else and not really part of the team. There's so much work that can be done, but leaders didn't get a playbook in the early days of the pandemic. There's no user manual for any of this stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, you know, people have been learning as we go along. There's so much out there about you know, how to effectively lead in hybrid times. But it's, you know, it's a leadership skill to be able to do that. Not all leaders are equipped in that way.
Yeah. So you made an interesting point. You said that people are leaving leaders and not jobs. Is that something common that you see, or is it the other way around, or a mix?
Yeah, I mean, I'm seeing it more and more. I would say I'm seeing it more and more in these last few years, because one thing that the pandemic, I think, gave to a lot of people is just that ability to reflect, like that ability to see, what do I really want? Am I getting it at the organization I'm at? Am I getting it through the work that I'm doing? And what a lot of people are finding is, you know, no, I'm for some, they're actually just wanting to try something new. But there's a lot of people who are kind of done with the leadership. They're finished with, you know, like micromanaging leaders who swoop in and solve the problem and check everything that you're doing and follow up on every little task. They're also done just with the lack of communication and transparency. If that hasn't been happening, they're also done with just leaders who do struggle with building that sense of team and that recognition that comes with developing a team, and not just giving people work, but actually listening to them, finding out, first of all, rewarding them for what they're doing well, but then also talking to them about where they're struggling. Even just noticing that they're struggling and initiating a conversation are things that people are wanting more and more. And it's not leaders and companies are connected. So a company will have certain values and they will hire leaders that line up with those values.
Yep.
And so when people are looking for other employment, I've got some clients who are leaving very well-paying jobs to look for something else. It's in a lot of cases a sign that they don't fit within the organization anymore. And they're really wanting to look at organizations that have values that really do line up with what they believe in, and that they employ leaders who believe in those same things. So I am seeing that more, where people, the reasons why people are leaving have to do with leadership. I actually posted something just on LinkedIn today. It was an article from Fast Company, and it was, the 7 mistakes companies make that lead to really good people leaving. And every single one of those 7 are connected to leadership in one way or another.
Interesting. That's interesting. I kind of always assumed it was the other way around, but that's a really good point. Yeah.
And I mean, as a result of that, like, people are looking at new opportunities in different ways. Like, I think it's been a myth for a long time that when you are participating in an interview that you are being assessed, which of course is true. I mean, the company is asking you questions, you're providing responses, they're assessing you based on what you're saying and what you stand for. But candidates now are taking more control of the process, and they are assessing not just the opportunity, but they're assessing the leadership. They're assessing like what kind of interactions happen, how are decisions made, how do leaders interact with employees, and they're asking tougher questions that assess the leadership, the culture of the organization, getting underneath things that are really important to them. And I love that. I love seeing that that's happening because, it shows that candidates are being really intentional about the choices that they're making. They're not just saying, oh, wow, there's a job offer. Yay, I'm going to take it and run off. Like, no, they're actually asking some tough questions before they sign and say yes to an offer. And I think that's going to help people, down the road.
So what are, and I'm going off script here, but it's just so interesting to me. What are some of the questions, like examples of questions that candidates could ask at the end of an interview or maybe during, to truly assess, the fit, the culture, quality of a leader?
Yeah, that's a great question. And because there's so many different ones. I mean, ones that I like especially around leadership would be, this would be a question for the hiring manager, obviously, would be, if I'm hired as a successful candidate, describe how we would work together, or, describe how decisions are made within the organization, describe, what contributions you solicit from team members, for example. Like, any of those can assess more the leadership. Around the culture, I mean, I've got some clients who say, but I asked, describe what the culture is like. And I said, that's okay, but it's not specific enough. Like, what about the culture do you want to know about? And some people will say, well, I want to see that their values are demonstrated. So ask that, you can say, describe how the company values are demonstrated in day-to-day interactions with team members, or, for some clients who particularly want to know, what kind of DEI or diversity, equity, and inclusion policies the company may adhere to. Another descriptive question would be, describe how you integrate DEI into your recruitment practices, into your coaching conversations,
Mhm.
into your team meetings, any of those kind of things.
Yeah.
Describe one that I saw recently, and it was a really good one, is, what things are employees surprised about in the first month after they're hired?
Oh,
Kind of cool.
interesting.
Or, why, what are some of the reasons why you work here? What keeps you here?
Yep.
Like those questions can give a little bit more insight on what the culture of the organization is like. And that's just a starter. I mean, there's so many different questions, but
Yeah.
those are things that candidates can certainly ask.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah. Um, so following up on that, so you know how, and we're kind of guilty of asking that question in our like interviews too, but that one typical interview question that people ask is, where do you see yourself in 5 to 10 years? Why do people ask that? And what are they trying to get out of it? Like, is there a great answer that they really need to hear, they want to hear?
And should you tell the truth?
Because, even being somewhere for 5 years is something that doesn't happen that much
It does
anymore. Like,
not.
there's so much transition.
Yeah.
I would say, and it's interesting because that is not as common a question, I don't think, now as maybe it used to be, probably for that reason. But what the individual or the panel would be looking for is not a job title per se, because you're just in the interview stage. You're not even within the organization. And some companies do not put anything about their org structure or anything like that online. So what the panel would be looking for is just something that shows that you do have aspirations of some kind. So, even to be able to say, like, over the next 5 to 10 years, I plan to, get my project management certification, and I would see myself transitioning from contributing to projects to actually leading projects within the organization. Like, even something like that doesn't really hinge on a title per se, or a department or a branch within the organization, would be fine, because it still shows that you are not planning to just be at the same level, that you do have some kind of plans for what you'd like to do in the future.
But within the organization is the key.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering.
Of course, because if you want the job.
Yeah, like, do you think if you were to say, like, even have any hesitation about, like, yeah, like, I think I like this role and I think I like this company, but I'm not sure, like, is that an immediate, like, just gone? Or, because I feel like that's the truth for everybody. Like, the actual truth is that you don't know. You're trying something new.
Exactly. And I mean, is it the place in the interview to talk about how, like, in 5 years I might be looking outside, and all this investment that you're going to make in me will be gone in a few years?
Yeah.
Probably not the best place to put it in the interview.
Yeah.
And that's why, I prefer an approach that more talks about what are your aspirations in general. Because, I mean, even the response that I just provided could be within the organization or might not necessarily be. So it's still a way of being really truthful with the answer. But yeah, do you know what's going to happen in 5 to 10 years? I mean, the reality is job security is not the same as it used to be.
Yeah.
So, candidates also, I do some coaching even with people when they have found their job, to help them not lose sight of a job search, even though that they have their job, which means you stay active on LinkedIn, you still, like, congratulate people on their work anniversaries, like things that people post, like be like regular with the network, and continue just to keep your eyes open. Update the resume frequently, because you just never know when you need to pull it out. And you don't want 5 years down the road to have to think, what the heck did I do in the last 5 years I need to put on here? Like just keep it up to date, almost like you're looking for work on a regular basis, even if you're not, because it keeps you current. And then that way, who knows, maybe a recruiter reaches out and says, I think you'd be perfect for this job. You know what? It could be worth the conversation just to explore it and see where it goes.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned resume. Do you have any resume tips in terms of spacing or number of pages? Because, you know, at Waterloo, we had like certain instructions given to us, and I've kind of heard different opinions. So I'd like to hear yours.
And what are the biggest problems that people have on their resume as well?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, those are both great questions. And I mean, the interesting thing is, if you gathered like 100 of me in like a big banquet hall or something and asked us all, probably there would be some similarity. But everybody, like every coach, even has their own style and approach and things that they recommend. In terms of length, first of all, and this is a big myth, a lot of people feel I have to keep it to one page. And I think one page is too short. And the reason why is because you want the content of the job posting to really inform and influence the length of your resume. So if you are applying for a job with, I don't know, like 20 qualifications, you need to make sure in your resume that you are showing evidence and proof that you meet those 20 qualifications, or at least like a good majority of them. Can you do that? No, of course not. There's just not enough space. So I say 2 pages is ideal. 3 pages for somebody with a fair amount of work experience is totally fine, so long as the resume communicates value and impact. So how candidates should do that is to create like value added achievement statements that incorporate results and outcomes. So think of each of the bullets under like the work history section of the resume for each of the jobs that you have. You want each of those bullets to not just be a capture of something from your job description, because that's easy. Copy from your job description, paste into your resume, send it off, and all of that doesn't really cut it. I think it did like a long time ago, but now you need to incorporate not just what you did, but it needs to also reflect how you did it. So like what activities you engaged in order to do this particular thing, and especially the results and the outcome. Like I say each of your statements should answer the so what question. So you could look at one of those bullets on your resume and ask yourself the question, so what? So what that I, delivered presentations, for example. Why was that important? Why was it significant? What kind of outcomes?
Yeah.
Impact. Exactly. So you want each of those statements to really bring that in. That's probably my biggest like resume tip is to make sure that those statements are transformed from those job description basic statements to ones that incorporate those results. And when I say results, it's not just numbers. Like, yes, some people are in jobs where they can report on like maybe time or money that they've saved or percentages or like any of those kind of things. But there's a whole lot of people who are in jobs where they are delivering value and they're providing positive impact, but you can't measure that in a number. You still want to be able to represent that result, that positive impact, even if it's not a number. So a lot of people will shy away from putting results in because they think, but I don't have any numbers to put in.
Yeah.
That's okay. Like, if you, like, I don't know, like created awareness or, like created a file system to make it easier for people to locate information, for example. I mean, there's no number that goes with that, but it's still positive impact. You have made people's lives easier.
Yeah. So you mentioned that, it's okay to have a resume over one page, 1 to 2 pages. I've heard, maybe more so in the tech industry, I don't know. So I've heard that, recruiters spend maybe 5 to 10 minutes on a physical seconds, not minutes.
That's when they have my resume.
Okay. We hope that they spend 5 minutes.
Like 5 to 10 seconds even on a resume, and if at all, sometimes I've heard that they go through those like a what is it called?
Well, they all go through AI these days.
AI, just to search
you're
for
talking about after they've passed that.
Yeah.
It's like the ATS, that applicant tracking system that in the surface.
Yeah. So is that true across all industries? And is it true that recruiters look at a resume for 5 to 10 seconds.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, I'd say that's fairly consistent across the board. I've heard as much as 20 to 30 seconds, which still isn't very long. I
That's
mean,
not,
that
yeah.
flies so fast. Yeah, like now, like looking for work, there's oftentimes not humans that are looking at all the applications unless you apply to the government of Canada, or like, you know, I'm in Ottawa, the city of Ottawa, they do not use ATSs.
Oh,
Actually,
I didn't know
they have
that.
Really?
human.
Cool.
Yeah, that's why the recruitment process takes a lot longer, because
Yeah.
they do not use software to screen people out. So so what that means is, you know, with the vast majority of organizations using that applicant tracking system or that ATS, you have to make sure that the resume really lines up to the job posting. So if your resume passes through that initial screening, which you hope that it does, and if you've lined your resume very well up to the job posting, then it should. Then yeah, the like anywhere from 5 to 20 to 30 seconds of, like, they're looking for, are you meeting the criteria of the job? They're looking for value and impact to jump right out. So a really great trick for people to do when they're writing their resume is, in those bullets, bring the value and impact to the front end of your statement.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, like something like elevating the visibility of an organization because of presentations that you've delivered, for example, bring that elevated the visibility right up into the front of the statement. So then that way, if the recruiter is, you know, just has a few seconds, they can see value, 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 jump right off the page. So that can be something that can be really helpful to people.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Is there also on the piece of paper, is there a particular section that, you know, like maybe the top section or where like people spend most time on? I don't know. That's a very mathy, statty type question, but
that's a great question, Archie. I mean, it actually is the top third of the resume. The top third of the resume carries almost more weight than the rest of the resume. And so what you find in the top third of the resume is two things in particular. I mean, one is hopefully a really well-written profile summary. So older versions resumes had an objective statement at the top, like, I would like to, you know, get into a supervisory position. Resumes don't have that anymore. That's been replaced by the profile summary. So the profile summary could be like, I don't know, like anywhere between 4 to 6 sentences that captures you and your work at a very high level. So it's a place to capture, like, you know, things like, you know, areas of expertise, sectors in which you've worked, some escalating responsibility if you've had the opportunity to do that. And to bring those skills that are really key for you, bring them to life. So like I read a lot of resumes that say, you know, team player, you know, works well with teams. That's great. But I mean, that's an overused phrase on a resume.
Yep, agreed.
Anybody can do that. Like, what does team player really mean? Like, specific. So, you know, it's taking those kinds of general statements and making them more specific. So, you know, instead of team player, you could have a statement that illustrates how you, you know, you collaborate and contribute cross-functionally across the organization, and you work well with, you know, different levels in the organization. I mean, that would be a far more descriptive statement than I'm a team player. So,
Yeah.
so that narrative, that profile summary is meant to be a high level capture of you at work. And it's a great thing to solicit feedback from others. Like, how would others describe you? You can integrate that kind of language and those kind of adjectives like into the profile summary. The second part that is on the top third of the resume that recruiters and organizations alike like to see, because it tells a very concise story, is a snapshot of all your different skills.
Mm-hmm.
So, and for somebody who's in tech, this doesn't just mean like software applications or computer languages that you're familiar with. It's also those softer skills like leadership or project management or customer service or any of those kind of things. Recruiters want to see not just the tech profile, but they want to know more about the individual. And of course, then your bullets that are under the work history section need to support what's in the top third of the resume.
Yep.
And if like a candidate is bilingual, put that in the profile summary,
Perfect.
because that can set them apart from other candidates who are applying for the same job.
Absolutely. Wow. I feel like I'm learning so much.
Yeah, this is great.
Oh, so much in resume building. I mean, one of the things that I'll say to clients is, and this can help manage the content too, is I say, like, a resume is kind of like a trailer to a movie. So a trailer creates interest for you to see the movie, but doesn't give away the whole storyline, the whole plot, or anything like that. The resume is the same. I mean, it doesn't need to have every single thing that you've ever done in your whole career, but it does need to create interest through the value statements, because the goal of the resume is to get you the interview. You need to create that interest.
Absolutely.
I have a very specific resume question, something that's been coming up a lot nowadays, and maybe we'll talk about this again, maybe right after, but is that people, especially those that get employed by like a massive, generally software company, sometimes they get fired in air quotes, before they even start. So the like people will pass like 7 or 8 rounds of interviews for these companies, and then they'll get hired, and then they'll move to the US, and then they'll sort of get fired before they even started. I don't know if that's the right term, fired, but
oh wow.
Yeah. So if you were to be in that situation where you kind of pass all these interviews, you sign an offer letter, but then you don't actually ever technically work for the company, would you put that anywhere on your resume, or would you pretend that never happened?
I know what you mean now. Yep.
Yeah, that's interesting. You know what? I mean, that's a unique situation I haven't heard of yet. But obviously it's, it sounds like it is something that does happen for some individuals, which is unfortunate. My guidance would be to not include it on the resume, because you didn't actually start there.
Yeah.
So it would be different if you were there for a month and a half to 2 months, and whatever happened, maybe there was a restructuring or anything like that, and you were let go without cause, then yes, you would need to put that on, because there's a paper trail of your employment somewhere. So you do want to be transparent about that. But if you were offered and then not offered, they withdrew the offer before you could do anything, I would say that's an example of something that doesn't need to go on your resume.
Okay.
But definitely something you would want to get feedback from the organization on, to ask why is this happening? What are the reasons? So that I can form your next choice.
I think a lot of this happened right when the pandemic hit, because we were in school at the time, and lots of co-op internships got the people had their offer rescinded, and so some people were like you said, well, you studied so hard and given 7 to 8 rounds of interviews, people better know that I was accepted to whatever, like Facebook or whatever. So
okay, yeah,
like that.
Yeah, I mean, is it a bad thing if you put it on? I mean, there isn't, so long as you can explain it. So if for anybody who decides that they are going to put that on because they're proud of having gotten in, but they're going to show, start January, end January, and that may, the trouble with that is it may create more red flags than the candidate wants to attract, because I always I like to just ask the question, if you're wondering about something, don't assume what happened, but there are some that might assume oh, that person was let go. Well, what happened? Were they not doing a good job in the first 30 days?
Yeah.
You don't, as a candidate, you don't want to attract that kind of attention. So I think I'd probably go back to, not including it for that reason, because you just never know. In the hands of somebody else, they may make some assumptions, and it may not, they might be assuming incorrectly.
Work in your favor. Exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I had another question, but I just forgot it. So
Okay,
we'll carry
cool.
on and I'll
If
ask
you,
it later.
if you, yeah, yeah.
It's one of those things, Greg, where if you go to sleep and you wake up and you go,
Oh
there's
yeah.
that.
I feel like I just woke up. So I guess a very related question. How long should you work at a company before you can put it on your resume? Because some people actually, some people will like sign an offer letter and then straight away they'll be like, put it on their LinkedIn, be like, I am going to work here.
Announce it.
Yeah. Do you think there's a problem with if you work for somewhere for like a month and then you move somewhere else? Should you put that or not, and why?
I really like being open and transparent.
Yeah.
So I would, like, if a client of mine asked that, I mean, first of all, it has to be the comfort level of the person. At the end of the day, it's their resume. They can kind of do whatever they want.
Yeah.
I like to err on the side of include it because, again, there's a paper trail somewhere, especially if you've announced it on LinkedIn and stuff like that. You don't want to cover it up. You just need to always be positioned to explain it. So, I will advise clients that, especially if you've left somewhere, you're going somewhere else, because in the interview, an interviewer might ask, like, well, why did you leave this company, or why are you looking for opportunities? So long as you can properly explain your leave story, it's good. And when I work with clients on how to tell that story, because you have the opportunity to really manage the messaging with that it's like a 3-part answer. You give a brief description of the facts, you follow it up with something you loved, even about your short time there, and then connect that thing that you love to the new opportunity. Now, if it was your choice to leave and because you got another offer somewhere else, then all you need to do is, position, as much as, you enjoyed your time there. You did, here are some things you did in the month. There was an opportunity that came up that was, more closely aligned with your skill set, more closely aligned with the work that you really want to do, was closely, aligned with the development path that you want to go on. And as a result, you decided to move.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
That's a great answer.
Perfect.
For sure. Yeah. Awesome. So I may or may not have been in this situation myself, but say you're in an interview and, you think the job is good, but the interviewer, like your hiring manager, may or may not have said something you didn't like, or maybe said like a snarky remark. Do you put that into consideration at all? Because of course you don't want to jump to judging somebody too quickly, but at the same time, you don't want to work for somebody maybe, who would say something like that. So what would you do?
Of course.
Yeah.
That's a great question, because that really falls into that earlier category of what we were talking about before, about assessing the organization, its leadership, its culture, all those kind of things. I like to think of all of the different sources of information that you kind of, maybe stumble upon or dig up through your own research as individual bits of information that are part of a bank.
Yeah.
So, if something happened like that in an interview, I would consider that as one source of information, not necessarily the whole picture, but it is one source of information. And it's enough of a red flag that the candidate could, in the interview, maybe ask a few more questions about leadership, like those kind of forecasting questions. So if I was hired as a successful candidate, describe how we would work together.
Yeah.
Or describe, like what's one thing in my experience that you value if I were to be hired, that I can make a contribution to the team. That person might be in a better position to ask some of those follow-up questions, but then they can also do some research. And, there's some, sources out there. There's Glassdoor, where, people will put obviously reviews of organizations, sometimes reviews of the interviews at that organization as well. I mean, it's kind of the TripAdvisor of the employment world. It's only as good as what goes up there.
That's
so
true.
Glassdoor is also one source of information. But then, to be able to talk to people, like if you're interviewing with this company and maybe a friend works there, or somebody, reach out and ask some more questions, like just to kind of get a sense for, well, what is it like on the inside? Like maybe for this one person, they had a particularly bad day, and that's like not indicative of how they
Exactly.
are.
Yeah.
Typically. So then do the research kind of around it just to make sure that you're getting other perspectives.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a great answer.
Yeah. Great question.
Thank you.
Okay.
Well, and it's like everybody does have a bit of that control to,
Yeah.
like you don't just have to, go forward and say yes. So many clients will say, but they offered, like, I can't say no. I said, well, why do you want to say no? Those are big reasons. Okay, well, what happens? Let's forecast this. What happens if you say yes? What's going to happen in 3 months, 6 months, a year?
Exactly.
So it's so important for people to really, really know before they say yes, and not to feel pressured, or not to feel like, oh my gosh, I got this offer and there's not going to be any more offers.
Yep.
So I should take this one. Well, no, like, we're in a very active job market that shows no signs of slowing down. Like,
Yeah.
there's lots of stuff going on.
Absolutely.
So people can and are encouraged to be more like selective and do that kind of assessment.
Absolutely.
So, how important is creating a personal brand, and should everyone create a personal brand? Because I actually have a bunch of friends that they're like, no, I will not post on LinkedIn. They're just like, I don't post. Should everyone post on LinkedIn? Like, I do, because it's for a business, but even employees, like.
That's a great question, Greg. I believe that, like, an integral part of the screening process now for candidates is really focused on, like, not just what boxes they tick in terms of like skills that you have and stuff like that, but it's more about the value. Like, it's more about, what can you as a candidate do for me, the employer? And they want to know that more. So, like, how you communicate that is through your branding. It's through all of your materials, all of your marketing. So, like, your resume, your LinkedIn profile, how you talk about yourself in an interview, how you talk about yourself in networking, like coffee conversations, informational interviews.
Yep.
They should be all telling the same story. And, like you mentioned, LinkedIn, even down to the photo that you have on LinkedIn should match your brand. Like, so, if your LinkedIn photo is this very formal headshot against a white wall, all very formal and dressed up, then that indicates to me that, perhaps you appreciate that formality and that structure. Where if like, you're a bit more, like, flexible or laid back or whatnot, a photo like outside in nature, for example, could be a better selection. So it's about, getting in touch with who you are, not just what your skills are, but truly, what can you do for an organization? Like, for example, my value proposition is around empowering employees to, be fulfilled in their career and make career choices that will, energize them and put them on the right path for development, a path of development that they want. I could be specific and say, I give clients feedback on their resumes. I help them with interview coaching. I help them build networking strategies. But it's all about the value. So when you strip out all the stuff that you can do, well, what is that value? So, and that's really what your brand is. You want to be able to communicate that. That's where the profile summary of the resume plays such a big role. You want your branding and what you stand for to come through in the profile summary. You especially want it to come through in the about section on your LinkedIn profile. You want it to come through in your headline of LinkedIn.
Yep.
Like, the headline, you can make that whatever you want. It doesn't just have to be your current job, although that's what LinkedIn does. It defaults to where you are now or where you're going to school. You can change that. Like, bring your value proposition into your headline, create some interest.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, Greg, I say it is a big part of the recruitment process. People do want to spend time. You don't create what your value proposition or your brand is in 2 minutes. Like, it takes reflection, and sometimes it requires It requires you to, like talk to other people, like talk to former classmates that you
Yep.
were in a program with. Like, well, what did I do for you? Like, what value did I offer? Talk to past employers, people close to you that know you professionally, and bring that into your messaging.
Yeah.
And it goes a long way to set yourself apart.
Yeah, no, those are awesome tips for sure. And so before my next question, just I quickly wanted to ask you, what are some of your tips for interviews? Be it in person or virtual, more so virtual nowadays. So what are some things that instantly, kind of give you a boost, like smiling a lot, being friendly, or whatever?
I actually also, I was going to ask a very, very similar question, so I might as well tie that in. I happen to own a $700 camera and a $300 microphone. Not flaunting to the world, just saying I'm a YouTuber, so I have to buy it. Do you think, along with Arshia's question, do you think that that sort of stuff matters for interviews? Like having like a beautiful, like a good looking video and high quality sound versus someone with, a $1 microphone, you can just barely hear them. Do you think that matters?
Yeah. Both of those are really great questions. So I'm going to start first with the tips.
Please.
Yeah.
Start with you. And then Greg, I'm going to come back. Remind me if somehow I forget what that question is. Do remind me of that.
Sounds good.
So virtual interviews, some of the things that come to mind are one of the things I mentioned earlier about making eye contact. So important. And making sure that your background is not like cluttered or like you've got piles of paper around you, because it sends a message about like just how you work. And so you do want your visual space. It doesn't have to be a setup. But it does just have to obviously look organized and be neat. You do want to, look at the green light on your device. You want to make sure that there's eye contact. And you do want to, this applies in person as well. You do want to smile on occasion. You want to be friendly. You want to participate in some of those icebreakers, some of that small talk. Be prepared to make the small talk because that's all part of the interview process. I would say the biggest thing that sets people apart from other candidates or can make it hard for them to move on in the process is preparing. And that includes, like, I don't recommend to anybody to wing their interview. Like some people will say, but Michelle, I'm just better in conversation. I prefer to just, answer questions on the fly. Except that then they get caught with a question that they have absolutely no idea how to answer. So doing some solid preparation beforehand, this applies to whether it's virtual or in person, you want to do, which is take out your job posting, forecast the questions that you're going to be asked, and then actually document your responses using what some people will know as the STAR approach, which is situation, task, action, result. It's a great way to, talk about your specific examples, and you do want to give specific examples. Interviews are all about evidence and proof. And so if you are very general in your responses, then you're not really giving the interviewers a chance to know, well, what's the impact of what you've done? So giving those specific examples, there's no messing around with it when you can actually pull out a specific story that illustrates how you, reprioritized when a project's deliverables like changed, or how you handled the customer complaint, for example, or how you delivered feedback to a team member if you're in a leadership position. So when you can give those specific examples and you can talk about what the situation or issue is, all the things that you did to handle it, that's the A in the acronym, and then the R is for results. What happened? The so what from the resume tips, this is where you get to expand on like what feedback did you get? Like how did your efforts positively impact someone else? And I find the other thing I'll add to that actually is document and practice, because the more you practice, it just is more top of mind. I do find that individuals who don't do any of that, they wonder why they don't get another interview, or they wonder why they don't get the job. And it kind of takes me back to one of my early interview coaching clients, like probably within the first year that I was in business. I remember we did a practice interview, and then like the remaining part of the session is feedback, which we never get when we do an interview, right? It's either you got the job or you didn't get the job. But if you got the job, oftentimes we don't know why. And I asked this particular client, I said, well, what did you feel worked really well in that practice? And he said, well, I answered all the questions, which was true. He had an answer for all the questions, but he never once gave me a specific example.
Right.
And all his answers were really at a very high level, and they were quite vague. So, we worked together to integrate that evidence and proof a lot more. And that can help you stand apart when you tell your career stories. You tell about those things that you're particularly proud of, that you've done really well. And some of the questions are negatively framed, like describe, one area of your abilities you'd like to work on or develop. And some companies, unfortunately, still say, what is your biggest weakness and why? They don't like weakness. No, it's more like to develop. It is something you're developing. You still have a chance to positively answer those questions, to cite something that you're aware of that needs developing, what you've done to start working on it, and what the early results of your efforts are.
Yeah.
It's a great way to package it up. So,
Awesome.
So I'd say those are probably the biggest tips. Now, Greg, to go back to what you said about, is it important to have like the setup and the microphone and, all that kind of stuff happening for you? Hey, when you have it, that's awesome. It's definitely going to enhance the experience. But the panel, or if it's a one-on-one interview, the interviewer is really there to assess one thing, which is your fit for that job. And so you could have a Hollywood style setup, not answer any of the questions particularly well or with any examples, and your Hollywood style setup is not going to get you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Awesome. Yeah, perfect. So when in an interview is it the right time to bring up the salary?
Oh, yes.
Right?
Well, I say pretty much like never.
Never, really? Okay.
And the reason for that is because if you bring up the salary in the interview where there is no whiff of an offer that's going to be on the table, you're jumping to a place that is assuming that you're going to get the job. So I will say to clients, like, unless they say in the interview, you are it, we're going to draw up an offer, at that point, it would be okay to have that conversation. But if that is not at all part of the conversation, and most times it's not, I mean, oftentimes the company is interviewing a number of people, then they're, collaborating and trying to figure out who they're going to decide. At the time an offer is made, then it's time to have the salary conversation. Negotiation. But yeah, it just it opens up too much to ask about like details of compensation in the interview. And the other thing is too, that interview may only be one in a series.
Yeah.
Now, I've had a client who actually went through 7 interviews before he was off the job. Crazy.
Yeah.
Like, they got to be able to make a decision before that. But, this is only conversation 1 or maybe conversation 2, and there's still more interviews to go. It's still too early. So I say to clients, let them take the lead on that. Now, they might ask you in the interview, describe your salary expectations. Totally okay to talk about it then.
Talk about it, yeah.
And but not ask.
Perfect. And so say that they give you an offer. So do companies typically lowball you in terms of, the salary? Are you expected to negotiate? Do they kind of have that in mind? Or, because I know some people, including myself, don't negotiate or don't negotiate too much to have kind of, to be afraid of whether they're going to take that offer away from me if I, keep negotiating. Or how does that work? Like, how do you navigate that?
Yeah. It's hard to say what is maybe in a company's mind when they're providing an offer. I mean, I guess the company very likely has a number in mind where they don't want to go past that number. And you as a candidate will also have a number in mind in terms of what you would be comfortable receiving. That is reflective of the value of your skills and experience against what the job is. And that's, how I encourage candidates to position it is, if you are going to ask for more, do connect what you're asking for directly to the job posting and connect it to the kind of results you've been able to get up until this point that line up to the kind of results that the job is asking of you. So I mean, with negotiation, if you don't ask, you may regret it later because you think, oh, well, if I asked, would they give me any more? But the company can say yes or no. I mean, this is where it comes down to, if you don't ask, you don't get. And so long as you're not just asking for the sake of asking, like if there is, a gap between what the job is asking for and what you can bring to it, you can absolutely ask for a bit more. Thinking too about the total compensation. So it's not just salary, it's also benefits, it's vacation. It's like that paid time off between Christmas and New Year's. If you're, working for an organization that does that, all of that kind of thing. So you do want to make sure that you're positioning all of those things too. But do companies expect that you're going to do that? I'm not sure if they expect it. I think it really comes down to the individual candidate and asking if there is a bit of a gap. Now, some people will prefer not to negotiate at the time of the offer, and they prefer to kind of wait and see, like be able to deliver on some results while they're employed. And then at, I don't know, like your 6-month review, make that request and say, I've been able to do X, Y, and Z over, the last 2 quarters, this is, I would like to ask for this. Is this something that's possible? At the end of the day, they can just say yes, or they can say no. And if they say no, I've never heard of anybody getting an offer withdrawn because they've asked for more.
Yeah.
They would just say, sorry, we're at the top of the range, in which case you as a candidate have the ability to choose now. Do you accept what the company is positioning and go forward from there? Or do you decide, what, that gap is just too much, I'm going to continue looking? You do have that choice.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that's an interesting thing that you mentioned with after you start the job, kind of bringing that up. So again, I don't know, like typically, and I think companies generally do like a yearly review, or do they do like a, I don't know.
It depends.
Yeah.
Some will do it kind of at the probationary time, which might be 3 months, might be 6 months. Some probationary periods are 6. Some companies will do a half-year review. Some will just wait till that annual process. So, if you decide that you're going to wait to ask, it might be a bit longer than just a few months because of the review process. It's also a bit of a risk too, because the company might say no. And then it's like, oh, I was really hoping they would give me more, but now they're not going to.
Yeah.
Oh, you're there now. So, but again, it's a choice to be made. Some people, especially now, like compensation is one of those deciding factors for a lot of people where they can go somewhere else and make more money for the same type of jobs.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Speaking of going somewhere else, that sounds like a transition to leaving, but that's actually not what I meant.
Interesting.
We are actually getting closer on time, but that's not what I meant about transitioning to that. On the exact same topic, people leaving. What do you think about the current layoff situation? So with, if you look at the big, like few tech companies, it's like 50,000 or so people
total
kicked out now. Yeah. Do you think that, so a lot of people complain on LinkedIn about like, hey, these companies are making record profits. I mean, they're always making record profits basically, but they're making billions in profits. How dare they let go of these people? Do you think that a company's scummy for doing that? Or do you think it really depends on things? Or what do you think?
That's a great question. Because it's true. There's so much going on right now, a lot of job loss. And from these large organizations that, we can probably draw some conclusions. There's a lot of money that they're making in there. kind of like that information bank that I mentioned before, I take this as a piece of information to put into the bank.
Yeah.
So, organizations everywhere, not just in tech, have been letting people go for years, and sometimes at crappy times, like before Christmas, and I mean, there are those stories, unfortunately. Is an organization the worst in the world for doing it? I would say it does come down to a business decision. Obviously, there was a business decision that needed to be made. And the unfortunate thing is, with every business decision, it affects a human and it sucks for them. I mean, I've gone through my own career transitions over my career. I've been restructured twice. It does suck to have to be looking for work when it's not your choice. You didn't resign. The decision was made for you. But for anybody who might be looking to join one of those organizations, they can look at how did, maybe that company needed to let people go, but did they do it respectfully? Did they give people like transition support when they were let go? Like as a candidate, I would look at all of those kind of things before I made a decision on the organization. And then I'd look at reviews. I'd try to talk to people maybe who were there. But the reality is, like, companies big and small have to do that at one point or another. And some companies do it really, really well. I mean, I've worked with some clients whose organizations treated them so well in the exit process, like communicated the message with respect, provided transition, like, some kind of support, like working with a career coach like me, for example, giving them benefits for a period of time, like, allowing them to say goodbye to people. Like, there's a good way, there's a right way to do it, but then unfortunately, like, horror stories, right? Like Twitter and like some of those organizations. And I mean, I've worked with some clients from like much smaller organizations who were completely blindsided. Like, they thought they were going into a room to talk about their performance review or this like best new idea that they had. And then boom, they left the meeting with no job. And no support. So it happens to big companies, small companies, and this is the hard part for people who have experienced a job loss. Is it's hard not to take it personally and feel like it's a personal affront, like they were singled out and they were told to go. But the reality is, there are business decisions that oftentimes in an exit process are not explained, even in of restructuring, and the person might be wondering for a long time, why did I get let go? My performance reviews were awesome. Like, people really enjoyed working with me. I always was there for my leader and like contributed great ideas, and they still met that fate. So, companies do have a chance to do it right, and not all of them do, but it is a source of information, as people are especially looking maybe to join one of those organizations too.
Yeah,
fair
that's
enough.
a great answer for sure. Yeah,
I agree.
Amazing. Well, we're over time, and it's just because Greg and I had all these amazing questions to ask you, and we had to skip through so many, but yeah, well,
time flies when you're having fun, right?
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So if our audience wanted to directly learn from you, how would they kind of go about contacting you? And, we're happy to drop links in the description below, because I'm pretty sure a lot of our audience members will benefit from one-on-one coaching from you, because you're first of all a very good communicator, and second, you really, really know what you're doing. So how would one go about doing that?
Sure. No, that sounds great. So yeah, for anybody who wants to reach out to me, I mean, you can follow me on LinkedIn. Right now, I am posting a career insight every single day, actually until the middle of February.
Wow.
I've been nominated for an award, actually. Exciting. Career coach in Ottawa. And the nomination period continues until the middle of February. So you can vote for me if you decide that you like this podcast and the answers and the insights that you've learned today. You can also reach out to me by email. So my email is michelle@mschafercoaching.ca. And you can post that link after if people reach out to me that way.
Yep.
If you also want to learn about some of the other like insights that I put together outside of LinkedIn, I'm a contributor to Brains Magazine, spelled BRAINZ. Magazine, and I'm an executive contributor. So you can Google me with Brains, and it's a library of all of my articles. So if you're looking for like interview support or what to do with networking or how to embark on transitioning careers, I've got different articles that support all those topics.
Fantastic. We'll definitely be linking all of those links down below. And please, everybody who's watching this, go vote for Michelle. She's amazing. Yeah. Well, Michelle, thank you so much for joining us today. This was so awesome. We learned a lot. Yeah.
That's great. I'm so happy.
Thank you.
I love these kind of conversations where, like where people can kind of, walk away with some new insights and new things to think about. So thank you again very much for inviting me. It was great to have the conversation with you both.
Awesome.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.